Now in our next section, we are going to have a discussion on the battle tanks that India has. In this, the most important one and the one which has been often in news is Arjun. So when we talk about the Arjun tanks, first of all you have to remember some of the basic details. For example, it is fitted with 120 gun capable of firing 6 to 8 rounds in a minute. Then you have the fin stabilized armor piercing discarding sabot, which is capable of piercing any of the contemporary armors that we have in the world. Then after that, it is also fitted with 7.62 millimeter machine guns and 12.77 millimeter anti-aircraft gun. So we have all these capabilities that have been fitted into Arjun, and that is why it is said to be one of the most important battle tanks that India has. But if you go into the history of Arjun, you will see that Arjun has been a tank which has been under various controversies. A lot of things have happened. For example, if you talk about the decision that was taken to build something indigenous for India, this decision was taken in 1972. 1972 is when we had decided that we would need something like Arjun tank to be able to combat any of the future wars that India might have, especially with countries like Pakistan and China being our neighbors. Then in 1974, DRDO was given the task to build the Arjun tanks, and then began the building of the tanks. Now, at this time, when Arjun tanks were supposed to be built, all the capabilities that Arjun was supposed to have were very superior as compared to most of the other tanks which were available in the world at that point of time. But there were multiple delays that happened. In 1996, it was dedicated to the nation. Then after that, in 2000s, you will see that the induction into the army started. 2009, it was called to be ready. So 2009, we are talking about 2009, starting from 1974. So it took approximately 35 years for this tank to be ready. Now by this time, all the things that was originally planned for Arjun had already become of no use. Because for example, we are talking about 1974. 1974 GPS was just a concept. 1974 laser targeting was nothing. It just existed in research papers. But 2009, GPS is a reality. All the tanks which are being produced now are being produced with the help of GPS. All the tracking devices, all the tracking mechanisms are far superior as compared to what you had in 1974. Similarly, the gun, the artillery. Initially, the artillery was supposed to be 108 artillery. But by the time it was built, it had to be changed to 120 artillery. So there were a lot of things that kept on happening. A lot of changes were brought into the Arjun battle tank, and because of which we saw that there were multiple delays that kept on happening. Not only this, you'll also see that there are discussions with respect to its weight. Originally, it was supposed to weigh approximately 40 tons. But by the time it was made, you'll see that the weight of this Arjun tank is 62 tons. Now this also makes a difference, because for the kinds of terrains that we have at the borders with Pakistan and China, you would need tanks which are not this heavy, which are not of 62 tons or more than that. You would need battle tanks which are lighter. Now if you look at the armor that Arjun tank has, it is a great armor. It is an armor which cannot be pierced very easily. We had tried this at a point blank range using the T-72 tanks that we had. And the T-72 tanks, even at point blank range, were not able to pierce through Arjun tanks. But this also comes with a cost. The cost is the increased weight. Because of the fact that it is so well protected. Of course, it's very great that it is so well protected. But at the same time, this kind of protection has also led to a downfall in the movement, a downfall in the operationality of the tanks. So because of all these reasons, we see that there have been multiple controversies that have happened around Arjun tanks. Not only this, we talk about the terrain, the kinds of terrains that we share with Pakistan and China borders. So initially, when the weight was supposed to be 40 tons, the ratio of power to weight, that is ratio of horsepower to weight, would have been 35:1, which is great. And for especially the kinds of terrains that we have in these regions, it was required. It was great to have. But because of this increase in weight that we saw, this has reduced to 22:1, which is still good, but not great looking at the kinds of terrain that it would have to move upon. So these kind of controversies, these kind of problems have always been associated with the Arjun tanks. Now, what we have seen with the army is that army has always been preferring, especially we have seen in the last few years, that army has been preferring the T-90 tanks which are coming from Russia. The Indian army has shown greater faith on the T-90 tanks as compared to Arjun tanks. There are several reasons for this. Many of the technicalities are also involved here, which are not very important for us to know. At the same time, when Arjun was finally given to the army was not very happy with Arjun. What army wanted was certain changes. So army suggested a lot of major changes and a lot of minor changes. Approximately some 14-15 major changes were demanded by the army, and approximately 60 to 70 minor changes were asked to be done. So this was then given to the Ministry of Defense. Ministry of Defense along with DRDO started to work on it, and ultimately many of these changes were also brought in. So for example, one of the complaints of the army was weight. But unfortunately, because of the design requirements that were given or put forward by the army, you'll see that the better variant that was built, all the changes, modifications that were brought in as per the requirements given by the army, this 62 actually increased. So we have two variants that are coming today. One which is Arjun Mark 1A and one which is Arjun Mark 2. So these two are the ones which are an improved variant of the original Arjun Mark 1 battle tank. But what we have seen is that now the weight has further increased. The weight has increased to 68 tons. So this also again, although it is one of the best battle tanks in the world, we can say that it is very well protected, one of the best protected battle tanks in the world. But still, because of these kind of reasons, we have seen that it hasn't been seen to be as successful as many of the other battle tanks of the world. So Arjun Mark 1A, Arjun Mark 2. These are the three variants of Arjun that you have today. You'll see that the recent news, if you look at, for example, the news that had come February and March 2020, you will see that new Arjun Mark 1A tanks have been ordered. I think it was 118 tanks that was ordered and that are being given to the army. So one of the best tanks in the world, no doubt about it. But we have seen that there have been multiple controversies that have always surrounded Arjun tanks. And most of it mainly because of all the operational delays that have happened in the making and producing of Arjun tanks. So this is about Arjun. Now the next tank that we need to discuss are the Bhishma tanks. So when you talk about Bhishma tanks, there are several names that you might come across. So just understand the meaning of these terms, these words, that should do away with the confusions that you might have. So you'll see that the names like T-90S Bhishma or T-90M Bhishma, T-90MS Bhishma, or sometimes also T-90SM Bhishma. These are few of the names that you might come across if you look at Bhishma tanks. So now, first and foremost, understand that all these are basically coming from the T-90 tanks which come from Russia. So these are Russian tanks which India had got, and some of the tanks were directly delivered by Russia. Some of the tanks were just delivered as components which were assembled in India, and then there are some tanks which were improved upon in India. So depending on all these different things that happened, we see that there are different nomenclatures that have been given to all these tanks. So the base of it all is basically the T-90 tanks which belong to Russia. So these are Russian tanks. Now we already discussed that Arjun tanks took approximately 35 years to be produced. It took a lot of time for Arjun tanks to be ready. Now all this time the army could not have sat idle. Army needed tanks to counter any of the combat situations that might arise, whether with China or with Pakistan. So in this case, what was decided was that the T-90 tanks be taken from Russia. And this tank was then named as Bhishma in India. So initially what we received was T90S tanks, which became T90S Bhishma. Then after that there were certain improvements that were done, and then we saw that the name was changed to T90M Bhishma. And then there is another modern version that has been called as T90MS or T90SM. Both the terms are being used for the same tank. So there are certain changes here and there that have happened. For example, the initial version that India had taken from Russia was supposed to be an inferior version of what Russian T90 tanks are. Or there is another version which is T90A. So there is T90S of Russia and there is T90A of Russia. So this tank that India had taken, this was supposed to be an inferior version of these two tanks. But ultimately, taking some help from France, some help from Israel, some help from Sweden, India had improved upon the technology that was supplied with the T90S tanks, and the variant of the T90S tanks, that is the Bhishma tanks that we have today, are supposed to be, and many of the experts believe this, they are a better variant as compared to the original T90 tanks which were given by Russia, or even the T90 tanks which are present in Russia today. So this has been a great improvement. One thing that we have also seen is that the weight of the Bhishma tanks are 46 tons. So one of the problems that we were talking about with Arjun, that was taken care of in Bhishma tanks. But still, the Bhishma tanks are not seen to be as good as the Arjun tanks. Although there are certain advantages that Bhishma holds over Arjun, but still Arjun has been seen as the best tank that India has today. So this is about the Bhishma tanks.